forward to this. Okay, well, thank you for joining us. And I've asked Dylan to share his experience with the bale grazing, and we're going to jump to his slides after I cover the piece on using your grazing plan to monitor whether you're regenerative or not. So a lot of the scientists and naysayers are saying, well, where are the numbers around this regenerative? And so the grazing plan does give us a lot of opportunities to measure if we're improving our farm performance. And my feeling is if you are building topsoil and increasing soil life and increasing that carbon sponge, your farm should be more productive per unit of input and per unit of water. So for instance, if you use the same fertilizer, you should be able to carry more stock. And stocking rate has the highest correlation to profitability of any other measure, so that's really important. A lot of dairy farmers, because they are, like I was, pretty overstocked, they translate that extra primary production into savings on supplement to reduce their costs. So you've all got some experience with the grazing plan, some more than others, and I realize most people jump off the plan or barely get on it. But a lot of the principles behind this, we can be mindful of. So I just want to go through what your grazing plan can teach you, and also talk a little about what my grazing plan taught me. But first, I'd like everybody, if they can share, hopefully Shane can explain where you're at on your regenerative journey, and just in a 2-minute introduction, maybe share one thing that you're going through this regenerative grazing process has taught you. Any volunteers to start? Come on, Dylan. Dylan, you're first.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. We started. It was almost 2 years since we started, so September 2019, and so I guess we decided to, through an association with Mark Anderson and Madeline, see what they do, and since then we've decided to take on people like Siobhan and Michael Cashmore from Integrity Soils to give us that independent advice on the pathway forward, and it's been really vital, I think, for us. And Jack, beside me, he's taken on the grazing aspect with working with myself, but he does a lot of it himself. And how would you say? So I guess we've probably been struggling a little bit with the grazing aspect because we think we've been overstocked for the last 2 years. Some of that initially was kind of realization last year, but we tried to do a lot of regrassing with multiple species, and in doing that, it caused more area to be out, which meant then we're overstocked once again, even though we dropped numbers. So this year we've gone from sort of 3.1 to 3.3 down to 2.7 cows per hectare, which is reasonable drop in stocking rate, hoping that will allow us to grow more surplus and get higher covers, etc. So from what we can tell, we've been doing a lot of biological feeders, trying to cut out. We've reduced our nitrogen by 2/3, so only putting on 1/3 of what we used to. We believe we're kind of there with the soil aspect and the feeding of it. We're there with this. We think we're there with the stocking rate now. It's just getting the grazing on the diversities work in progress as far as taking out a 10% a year and putting in diverse species, but it's just the grazing aspect we have to get sorted or nail this time to be fully kind of regime. Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Thanks for that. And how about you, Simon? How's it going?
Yeah, I guess I've been trying to graze well sort of semi-unsuccessfully for the last few years. Certainly grown a lot of surplus in the spring, but haven't necessarily been able to carry that through so well. Done a lot of big mob stocking, I guess, putting a lot of ewes and lambs together, cows in with them sometimes, and even adding hoggets into the ewes later on when there's lots of feed. I guess the last 3 years I've been doing all grass winter on the for the ewes, and I've had a mob of cows in with them. I guess that's nothing revolutionary, but that's worked quite well.
It's very regenerative, I think.
And I guess one advantage of that is in the spring, when I don't have as many paddocks out with crop, there's more paddocks with grass, so growing more grass in the spring, which is a good thing.
Mm-hmm.
I haven't, just been able to nail it in the autumn. I've come unstuck.
Is that because we've had a couple of dry summer and autumns in a row?
Yep. Part of it, management as well, Siobhan.
Yeah.
But yeah, still very interested on getting the grazing right. I've also done a lot of regrassing into multi species. So I'll continue to do that. What else should I say? Yep. I've got been caught out too with having too many different mobs. So I've moved to a taama now that had, for example, bulls, hoggets, ewes, cows. All just too much. Now there's just 1,500 ewes. So it's all one mob. So hopefully that makes it easy.
So yeah, well done, Simon. You've been at it for at least 3 years. You kind of started right along with Hamish Belsky, very keen to improve your farm's performance. And I know you're on a new farm, and so how's that going on the new place?
It's going slowly. Yeah. I guess coming here, a lot of the fertilizer history is sort of non-existent, which is not. It's in pretty good heart for all of that. Big paddocks, and the pasture is quite unpalatable. It's been a lot of set stocking over the years with big paddocks, so there's been a lot of fertility transfers. And that's, I guess, the way I've been doing it's made a lot of work for me, because I'm doing a lot with portable troughs and electric fencing, obviously. So that absorbs a lot of my time, especially when you have a few pipe leaks here and there, as you do.
Yes.
But already a year later, the pastures are looking much more palatable and greener already after a year of intensive rotations, right throughout the year, really.
Yeah, that should reduce your areas that are ineffective with the mobbing you're doing.
Yeah, it's improving it, but I think I'm going to have to intervene with tractors. I have to regrass, I think, a lot of the pastures, because I was disappointed. I had good covers, especially saved up for cattle in the autumn, and they didn't want to eat it. So I had to top it. And I was pretty gutted.
Yeah.
So that tells me they don't want to eat it.
When did you shut up your autumn feed?
February, March.
Yeah, that might have been too early. I see a lot of people shutting up their feed too early, when they might have got another nice green vegetative grazing off it and still grew enough feed for summer. Although this summer, maybe not.
Also, those older pastures I should have left set stocked. They used to being short, so I should have kept them short the whole year round, instead of, once they got long, they just turned to rubbish.
Yeah, you're probably managing a lot of brown top and dog's tail. Yeah, cool. The approach we're taking with those types of paddocks is just lifting the target grazing height and residual height just 1 centimeter a year, because you do lose quality rapidly. So it'll take more time, but if you set stock, that they'll eat out the good plants, and you won't get the succession into the better plants, which is one of the most important things we're trying to achieve. You know, we've got a lot of brown top and dog's tail too at Ridge Park, and it's really hard to manage. So I definitely know where you're coming from.
It's a minor well, quite a minor point you said there, but a major one, that to increase the grazing residual by so much every year instead of going.
Yeah, you can't go too quickly because of the types of grasses you have.
Yeah, that's what I've done. So
yeah,
run into trouble.
Yeah, no, a lot of good learning there. Thanks for sharing. Shane, I don't know if you're able to share with us. If not, you can continue to listen. Hopefully you can see what's happening.
Yes.
So I'm going to go ahead now and try to share a little bit about monitoring. Does everybody have their grazing plans in front of them, or like a planning sheet?
Yeah. 1 minute.
Yeah. We'll let, I know the cabinet Simon's going to drag his plan out, because last time I was there, he couldn't find it. And I was like, oh, I think you put it in that cabinet, and it was still in there.
Yeah.
A year later. But that's all normal. So, you know, Dylan's been really good, but I have to admit the clients that have kind of gotten on the plan, they are getting the results we're expecting. So I have clients in North Canterbury, and I have been talking about how Dairy NZ on their website had some research showing that if farmers grazed at the 3-leaf stage instead of the 2-leaf stage, they would grow 1.1 tons more feed. And those North Canterbury farmers actually grew 900 kgs, over 900 kgs more per hectare, but they had reduced their fertilizer by 2/3, just like Dylan. So that was just a matter of achieving those optimal recoveries in the summer, when none of us ever do. You know, that's the hard part. They were able to really increase their production. And I think I have another slide that I'll show you soon about research by Bromes done in the 1960s that showed when you overgraze in the summer on perennial ryegrass pastures, you can reduce the annual production of that pasture by 50%. So that's kind of our first opportunity to lift our grazing wedge, grow more grass, because I feel that you know, our farms could be much more productive than we think. So I'm going to go ahead and share something with you. Share my screen. I'll share sound, and we'll go to a slideshow. Hopefully you'll be able to see it. And can everyone see the screen with my son and maybe future daughter-in-law in there?
Yep.
Yeah.
So I'm just going to again recap my story, because I'm still learning so much about these grasslands, and it was really doing this, the grazing planning developed by Alan Savory, that started to teach me so many things. Actually, my farm became my teacher, which is amazing, because, you know, the grazing plan puts you on a cruise control. And then we also, as we were managing for diversity, start to see changes that kind of blew my mind. We were getting more diversity happening in the pasture, but there was a knock-on effect of diversity everywhere. In other words, seeing more birds and more insects and all sorts of things. So I do want to give a nod to Alan Savory, who, you know, it's all his insights that started me on this journey. And I'm not a holistic management educator. I just want to qualify myself. All I am is a farmer that used the holistic grazing planning on my farm. And it taught me so much that I started, to try to teach other farmers, because I think it's so useful. But I think the big difference with the holistic management, and it doesn't have to be a farm you're managing, it could be a business or it could be a government. The difference between the holistic management and what we used to do is we used to manage for net profit at year end, and that's all we looked at. But with holistic management, you want to have a net profit at the year end because we want farmers to stay in business, but you also want to preserve the ecosystem, your land base, so that future generations have the opportunity to make a living off that farm. So that's the difference. And then every decision we make, we kind of think of in terms of, well, will I make money, but will my children and grandchildren and maybe 7 generations from now, will they also have the resources to make a living as well? So that's holistic management in a nutshell. We won't go on too long, but I do think from what my farm has been teaching me, and also now farms in New Zealand over the last 4 years, our grasslands can be so much more productive than what they are. And I think Central Otago should really be looking like this even throughout the summer, because once diversity happens, it heals your water cycle, which is really important. And one of the things that makes me believe our farms can be much, much more productive than they are is because, I've discovered by doing research that, 12,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, the grasslands of the world were teeming with wildlife, just teeming with many, many more species that have become extinct, probably hunted to extinction. And if the grasslands of the past could support so much wildlife, they must have been much more highly productive. So for instance, there was a huge megafaunal extinction about 15,000 years ago in the Americas. So these numbers show you on the left of the dash, the left of the slash is how many animals in the different size groups remain, and on the right of the slash is how many there used to be. So if you look at the top, the megafauna, things like mammoths and mastodons and giant sloths and all these things that used to be around, you can see in the Americas, they were completely wiped out. And that happened, it coincided with the arrival of humans 15,000 years ago. So then the grasslands that existed were reduced, and there were probably lots of plants that depended on those animals, just like today. The grassland plants live in a symbiotic relationship with the animals on them. And generally, when you take animals off the landscape, like they have in many of the parks in the Southwest US, it actually turns to desert because those animals were keeping it healthy. But even the medium-sized animals, antelopes and things have been reduced all across the world. And so I do believe regenerative farmers are trying to regenerate these unlimited grasslands of the past and increase the productivity, because the productivity of the past was much, much higher than it is now. One scientist says there was probably 100 times as many ruminants on the Eurasian grasslands as there are now. And by the way, at the time, methane levels were the lowest in the last, several thousand years, tens of thousands of years. Methane levels were half of what they are today, even with hundreds of times more herbivores. So again, the problem with our climate and methane isn't burps from ruminants. The problem is we've reduced the life, we've reduced the biology, and biology itself contains carbon. And it also mitigates methane, as Walter Jena taught us. So on our farm, you know, we started to manage for more diversity in the grasses because we wanted better flavor. And we really hadn't expected the results that we got. And the biggest help for us was our pastures didn't dry out in the summer anymore. And that was huge because we had been, you know, as Dylan knows, we had been, you know, copying everything the Kiwis did. We were growing perennial ryegrass and white clover, managing it the same. And we just didn't have deep enough roots. And with our continental climate, it gets hot and dry in the summer, and my ryegrass pastures would be brown. And once diversity happening, we could see, you know, green grass, and we had deeper rooted plants, and even the perennial ryegrass didn't turn brown anymore, which was a big money saver for us. So we saved $90,000 in supplement costs because we kept our pastures growing all summer. So that was huge. But one of the knock-on effects of increasing the pasture diversity is it affected the insects and the birds and all sorts of other wildlife, fish and amphibians. And even though we had more insects, we ended up with fewer pests as well, which was kind of cool. You know, we had 40 apple trees on the farm, and we didn't have a single caterpillar in any of them because the birds, you know, gobbled them all up. And we're also happy with how healthy the cows were. We saved a lot of money on medicines, which was really important because we were organic. And yeah. So a lot of this is about protecting our future resource base, which is really important, and also building in resilience into it. And I think with our climate getting drier and drier, that's really important. But one thing I notice a difference between how New Zealanders look at your pastures and Americans look at their pastures is you like to have that neat and tidy look. But because diversity is so important in making these grasslands productive, I think we need to look at our grassland more like how we look at a native forest. So when you go into a native forest, there's nothing neat and tidy about it, but it's beautiful. Like you walk around and you'll be like, oh, look at that ponga, look at these ferns. You know, there's all sorts of many interesting things and variety. But when you look at a pasture, you want it to look like a golf course. And that's not necessarily the look that's going to make you the most money, because it's diversity that builds in the resilience. But that being said, as Simon found out, we don't want over mature grass. We want to manage for green grass, because it's only that green grass that can, for one thing, harvest solar energy, but also when these grasses are green and vegetative and other plants, they're pumping liquid carbon down into the soil. And for us, that was the big eye-opener, was when we managed for perennial ryegrass, we thought we were so sustainable, and I guess we were, but our soil organic matter never went up. You know, it stayed the same, about the same as you have here in New Zealand. But we couldn't get it to increase, even though we thought it would have. And I think part of it is encouraging those deeper roots. And I believe now that it's the liquid carbon pathway that Christine Jones talks about that increases our soil carbon. So the deeper roots we have, and the more time those roots are alive and the plants are green and vegetative, the more carbon you'll be pumping down into the soil. And I talked about the insect increase. For me, it was almost like a spiritual thing, because this Carna blue butterfly came to my farm in 2014 after about 6 years of this regenerative grazing. And, when I was at uni, I was running on the cross-country team, and we used to do our training in a forest near school. And at the time, developers decided to cut down that forest and put up a gigantic American shopping mall. So our whole cross-country team got together with local people, and we were protesting the building of this mall. And our mascot was this Karner blue butterfly, because apparently they lived in that ecosystem called the pine bush. And they're very rare, and the ecosystem is too. Well, as you can imagine, the mall is there. It's been there for 30 years, big as day. I don't know where the butterflies were, but they came to my farm in 2014. And for me, that was God's way of telling me that I was on the right path. That was kind of, it was healing for my soul. And we had a lot of bird life on our farm, and we had a huge increase in the ground nesting birds. And I've talked to all of you before about that. I think that's really important for New Zealand. And I believe by just providing more habitat and more food, it allowed these birds to, live and thrive, even in the presence of all sorts of predators, including weasels, minks, skunks, fox, snakes, all kinds of things that love to eat birds' eggs. So it's more about landscape management and diversity to help bring around and heal all the life that used to be on our farms. And this also brings us to the idea of fertilizer, because the more I started researching these unlimited ecosystems, the more I learned that birds and massive flocks of birds played a big role in these grassland and forest ecosystems of the past. And they applied fertilizer by air. In New Zealand, birds would go out to the ocean during the day and fish and come back, and they would, roost in the trees, and their dung would help fertilize the land. And I have this photo up. It's not a photo of passenger pigeons because they're extinct. But when, these first settlers came to the US, somebody put in their diary that it took 14 days for one flock of passenger pigeons to fly overhead. There were 5 billion of them. And it's just another way we humans have reduced the performance of our ecosystems. So not only could these ecosystems support many, many animals on land, but also in the air and also in the ocean. So I mentioned that we had fewer pests, here in New Zealand. I've got to cover my garden for the butterflies, and it's a battle against the rabbits. But in New York, we didn't have to put anything on there, and we never had any trouble with the pests, just because things were in balance. We were organic and weren't spraying anything. So Hamish Galloway is up in Hawke's Bay, and he's another practitioner of the grazing plan. He's done it for his first year, but he was biological for a long time. And, his soils are really pumping. When we were up there, we were, smelling the pasture soil, and there was a lot of smell, which indicates a lot of biology in the soil. So just like these grasslands in the past had a lot of biology on top of the soil and in the air, there was also a lot of biology underground. And that was probably the real important one too, because a C3 grassland has more, it's got 2/3 of its life underground. So super important. And by the way, Hamish he's been getting really good results with quality on his pastures with 5 shifts a day, just in that late October, November period when it's really important. But I couldn't believe the quality of his pastures. But it was really interesting. This is not his farm, but we did go to a spot on his farm where he had used a power harrow to cultivate before corn. And even though his soil smelled beautiful under his pasture, in that paddock, even though it had a winter cover crop that was, 40 centimeters high of green growth, there was no smell at all in that pasture, because the tillage must have, chopped up the housing for all the soil biology, and there was none. And when you see pea spots in your pastures like this one, which is an extreme case. I couldn't believe this when I saw it. But this is indicating that there's no soil biology under there except where some animals had laid down some excrement, and then all of a sudden some life is starting to grow. So if you dug a hole in between these pea spots, there'd be no smell in this pasture. So again, I think this whole regenerative movement is all about restoring the biology that's supposed to be above the soil and below the soil. And, I call it regenerating the unlimited grasslands that used to exist a long time ago. And, I've seen photos, these are elephants, obviously, but I've seen photos of how scientists depict what the mammoth grasslands look like, which covered most of Europe, where all of our animals and plants that we farm now come from. And you always see a photo of this like kind of brown grass that looks like tussock and mammoths on it, and it's like short grass. I'm like, how do the mammoths, with just their nose, eat tough brown tussock grasses? It just didn't make sense. And as I've done the research, I found out they didn't. The mammoths ate forbs, so they literally ate flowers. So this is a photo from just some wild plants in Scotland. This is what the mammoths were eating in the unlimited grasslands of the past. It was full of diversity. They could just, as you know, if you go out to your garden and there's, a bunch of flowers, you can just, grab them and pull a bunch out easily with your hands. Whereas if you grab a tussock and try to, pull half of that forage off it, it's almost impossible. So this is amazing. This really blew my mind and helped me understand a lot more how important having different classes of plants, just like Elaine Ingham and Nicole Masters are recommending. The forbs are really important as members of your pasture species because they were a big component of these grasslands of the past. So I tried to find photos of, what this might have looked like. And so then I just, I picture a mammoth on here, and yeah, she'd be able to grab this stuff with her nose and her trunk and stuff it into her mouth. And the other thing that, I've known for a long time that my farm taught me years ago is that humans used to be an integral part of this grassland, and we evolved there. I remember walking through a pasture with my dog at home, and a deer jumped up and ran away, and it had been sitting down only, maybe 5 meters from where we were, but we hadn't seen it. But the important thing is my dog never saw it jump up and run away. And I think that's why humans evolved to go on 2 legs, because we were in a savanna. And by being able to stand up, we could see game, but we could also see predators. So we were part of these grasslands of the past. And it's really important now that we preserve the Kiwi farming culture, because, farmers here, you are part of your grasslands. You've got a really strong pastoral farming culture, probably the best in the world, and also infrastructure and climate. And I think you people here are going to be the the climate heroes once you learn how to get this diversity happening and increase your soil carbon. It's going to be massive. But just like the tiger was the grassland, I think we too, grassland farmers and ranchers, are the grassland as well. So sorry to bore you with all that. Now we're going to get into the really exciting stuff about monitoring things on your grazing plan to see whether you're regenerative or not, because I think it's really important to monitor how many kgs per hectare you grow, and that should go up per unit of input and unit of water. And for one thing, the grazing plan provides a way for you to measure that we're going to get into now. But do you remember when we studied maths, and this triangle was the sign for change? I think it's really important as regenerative farmers that we want to see a shift and a change in diversity in our water cycle, and also the amount of carbon that we're building. And if we don't see those shifts going in the right direction, well, we might not be as regenerative as we think we are. So, so this is based on Alan Savory's work on monitoring, and I've kind of adapted it to kind of New Zealand conditions, but you could probably look at these things anywhere. But also I picked up on some really easy ways that we can keep track and monitor the results we're getting, so that it doesn't have to be hard. But these are probably really important things to keep track of, because if we don't, you don't know what you don't measure. And I think that's really important. So all of these things really can be related back to the grazing plan itself. And I'm just going to go over and explain how these all work. So the first thing we need to monitor on a daily basis as we go through our grazing plans and execute them is the animal performance. So, you know, a lot of consultants go out to farms and they start digging holes. The first thing I do is I look at the livestock, because if they're thriving, well fed, and especially if they're fat, that farm is probably pretty regenerative. And your animal performance it's the combination of the energy harvested and how you convert that into meat or milk. And that energy conversion is the hard part. That's where we bring in all the mobbing and combining mobs so that Simon doesn't have to run around with live strand. The more mobs that you have together, the less of that work you have to do to get the same animal impact. Because it's actually the animal impact that's the superpower that our livestock possess. And it's really important to not worry about the height of your grass, but look at the physiological advancement of your grass as it goes through the season. And I like to look at the leaf stage, and we've been using perennial ryegrass as our indicator plant just because it's basically everywhere. But you actually have to get down on your knees and look at that leaf stage. The plate meter is not going to measure that. So this is an example of the 2.5 leaf stage. On our sheep farm trial, Rick and I have been targeting the 2-leaf stage of perennial ryegrass for any mob with ewes and lambs, or for mobs of just lambs. But we do know that that's a compromise. Perennial ryegrass isn't recovered till it's at the 3-leaf stage. So the ideal thing to do would be, if you do compromise for, to try to get animal performance with your lambs, then follow that up in the summer with a more full recovery, so that you don't start losing perennial ryegrass to plants like dog's tail and brown top. And on Rick's pastures, he measured the growth, between that 2-leaf stage and the 3-leaf stage. And in the spring, at the end of his recovery period, between the 2 and the 3-leaf stage, his grass was growing at 120 kgs a day. But, in the time it took from after the grazing to get to that 2-leaf stage, it was only growing at 80 kgs a day. So what this tells me is, farmers, if you're using the grazing plan to achieve that optimal recovery, you can actually allow your farms to grow grass faster with not adding fertilizer. So these are, after about 8 years of the regenerative on my farm, this is kind of the heights and the number of tillers that we were trying to achieve. So we were shooting for 5 to 7 leaves on our cocksfoot. In this case, we've got 4.5 leaves on perennial ryegrass, and the Timothy just has 4 leaves. And one cool thing about the grazing plan that most people don't realize is that once you set your cruise control that we're going to look at in a little while, which is the cruise control for your round speed, and that gives you something to benchmark against to decide if you've got a true surplus. And one mistake I used to always make on my farm, and I see it happening here too, is in October, November, when you start to grow heaps of grass, people panic and they try to control the grass with utilization and make their animals eat lower. But then, as you see on the top photo, then other paddocks get away from you. So then you cut those for baleage or silage, and then you run out of grass. Then you're back down to that 2-leaf stage. Your whole farm is growing grass much slower. And that amplifies the summer slump. And this is what the grazing plan helps us get around, because if you can stick to your cruise control and benchmark against that, you can make decisions to help decide, well, when is my true surplus? So here's an example of a sheep farm where, I think this is October 27, and they've slowed the round down so that those animals will tidy up the paddock better on the right. But you can see on the left side that grass is way too mature for any mob with lambs. So the grass is getting away from them. The ideal thing to do would have been to stay on the flash graze and leave a little more behind, but also keep on top of the paddocks in front of you. And that's a tricky thing. So I think this grass is over mature for the class of stock that are running here. And again, and this happened, they can't keep on top of it now because they had slowed down the round and not done the flash graze that we'll talk about later in the spring. So at this point in time, if this farmer had benchmarked against their grazing plan, they would have said, well, we like our residual, but we're growing too much grass ahead of us. The proper thing to do would have been shut up a couple of paddocks for hay or baleage, or maybe defer some paddocks so the animals are going on to higher quality grass. And I used to think I could do this in my head when I was managing my dairy cows, but I never could. I always got it wrong. I always shut up too much for hay or baleage because I wasn't on a plan. But if you're on the plan, it helps you work out, well, how many paddocks are we going to need in 2 months or a month from now, and how do we get there? So how do we push this spring surplus into the summer when we need it? And this grass growth curve, we've all seen this. It's really important. But when we try to deck our paddocks or have high utilization to control quality, we actually lose a lot of growth. So if you look at, that bottom parentheses, that's how much grass they grew coming off that low residual in the same amount of time as the top parentheses grew coming off a higher residual. So this is just something to keep in mind if we want to have our grass on our farm growing faster. And you need to grow your grass faster across the whole farm to increase your primary production. And you've all seen this before. I've shown all of this to you before about what happens when you take more than half of that pasture plant in a grazing. So once you get to 50% utilization and higher, you drastically increase the amount of roots that die. And I think this is why I was able to increase the carbon in my soil once I went to the regenerative, because we were targeting 50% utilization by volume, and I wasn't killing my roots anymore. So my carbon went up, and it went up enough. If half the farmers here did it, you'd offset the entire country's greenhouse gas emissions, including methane. So here's a dairy farm situation. This is the Pringle farm. This is their 3rd round last year. And these cows are almost finished in this paddock because they've taken a bite off of almost 85% of the plants. On the first round, I like to see them take a bite off of 100% of the plants. But once there's dung present, 85% is enough, because if you make them eat 100% bite off, make them eat a bite off of 100% of the plants, and they have to eat near their dung, they're going to skip the stinky areas, and they're going to eat the better areas lower and create more mosaic. So this is Alison Murney's pastures in Mungati. She's been on the grazing plan for 2.5 years now. We actually started it with her husband, Matt, who passed away last year. And so she's been planting a lot of diversity. You know, there's 2 ways we can go about getting the diversity, like Simon's finding. It's nice to have these diverse pastures. They're much easier to manage than, you know, brown top, dog's tail, and perennial ryegrass. So she's done quite a bit of regrassing into perennials and moving away from crop. And here's some of the things she's keeping track of on her grazing plan. One thing she likes to do is write in the middle. Once she achieves the grazing, she writes in what the recovery was, because she had a plan, but some, you know, things never go as planned, and you're going to change things. So now she can have a quick glance at this grazing plan and see what her recoveries are, then go down to the, you know, bottom of the plan to line 27, which is her target recoveries, and see if she's there or not. And so this is kind of a quick look at the data sheet that I've shared with you, but I don't know if Shane is still on here listening, but I don't think you've seen this bit until I sent it to you. And this is establishing, well, it allows farmers to establish the cruise control to benchmark all your decision making against. Oh, so Shane is here. He just can't unmute. I don't know why. So, you know, Rick helped develop this data sheet, and it's a huge improvement over, you know, Shane. Remember, we did the grazing plan years ago, and we did the maths by hand, and it was just horrible. So now we just plug in what optimal recoveries we want for each month, and then we'll duplicate at the bottom that master sheet for every month. And it's going to give us a cruise control to benchmark against. So once we've established that cruise control round speed and you're on it, then we can look at our target residual and see, are we achieving that target residual, or are they eating lower? You know, do I need to add some supplement or add some more paddocks? Or maybe that target residual is getting too high and they're not taking a bite off of at least 85% of the plants, and we're going to lose our quality. Well, then we need to drop paddocks out. But it's hard to know when to drop the paddocks out if you're not on a cruise control to benchmark against. Does that make sense to you, Dylan and Simon? Oh, I guess you're muted. I can unmute you, I think.
Yeah, no, that makes sense.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, no, a lot of this detail coming out is helping us. Like, we're writing stuff down now to help us.
Okay.
Yeah,
So, you know, we talked a little about the monitoring. The biggest thing we want to monitor is how many kgs we grow per hectare, because, you know, I kind of went on and on about this unlimited grassland, but I do believe that if we can learn to mimic nature, we can learn how to grow more fertilizer from the sun. And per unit of input onto your farm, including water, you should be growing more grass every year. And with that said, you should be able to carry more stock per year, because you're building topsoil. It only makes sense. But how do you know if you're growing more if you don't measure it? And the grazing plan actually has a really cool way to have a really good guesstimate if your pasture production is going up or not, without plating every time your animals graze a paddock before and after, because that's way too much work. So instead, we look at what Alan Savory's, you know, measured in animal days per hectare. We just translate that into kgs per hectare. So this is one of our grazing plans from Rick's Ridge Park Farm. And do you see under October where he penciled in his grazings? After the grazing events, he wrote in a number. So that is his animal days of feed harvested off that grazing. So that's the number of animals that he was running at the time. So you'll find that if you look at your grazing plan and go down to line 29, it's the type of animals, it's the number of animals that you've got on the pasture for that month. So he takes the total number of animals in that mob, and he multiplies it by the days, and then divides it by the hectares, and it gives him how many animal days per hectare. To convert that into kgs of dry matter, you just multiply by 1.4, and that'll give you your kgs of dry matter. So that's 1.4 is an estimate of the amount of feed one animal unit eats. For Dylan, because you're dairy, it would be better for you to use the number that you use in your feed budgets to determine what your animal requirement is. So for you, it might be 16 kgs of dry matter per animal. So you'd multiply how many cows in the group times 16 kgs or whatever your is, and you multiply that by how many days they're in the paddock and divide by the hectares, and that's going to give you how many kgs those animals harvested per hectare for that grazing.
Is it the hectare of the paddock the area that they were given?
So well, it's best to do it by paddock. So when they're done grazing the paddock, you'll know how many days or what part of a day they were in the paddock. So they might have been in one whole paddock for just a half a day. So then you'd multiply how many cows were in the group, so that's animals, times the days, which is 0.5, divided, and then you'd multiply that by the requirement, which might be 15 or 16 kgs a day, depending on their stage of lactation. So that's your kgs, and then you divide that by the hectares in the paddock.
Yeah. So
that's going to give you your harvested per paddock. Now, if you're supplementing, you have to subtract out the supplement. So you do that before you divide in the hectares. So that's going to give you an idea of what these pastures are producing. So eventually we're going to have numbers after each grazing event for one paddock, and we're going to add up all the kgs per hectare for every grazing event on your grazing plan, and we're going to write it in on column 8. Can everyone see column 8 at the very far right hand side of your plan?
That one. Okay. Yeah.
It says total yield. It says animal days, but we're going to do it in kgs of dry matter. So this is going to be really important. This is how the grazing plan helps you see if your farm is regenerative or not, because we're going to total all those up at the end and divide it by millimeters of rainfall. So if you go to the right-hand corner of your right-hand bottom corner of your grazing plan, at the second from the bottom line, there's a line that says animal days per hectare per millimeter of rainfall. That number should go up every year per unit of input if you're regenerating and building topsoil. So we'll be able to compare year on year your grazing plans, and if that number doesn't go up, you're probably not regenerative and we need to replan and do something different. Does that make sense to people so far?
Yeah.
So really important number.
What's the annual rainfall, was it? You're talking about?
So, well, I'll get to it in a minute. part of the monitoring is monitoring your rainfall, and we'll get to that quickly. And there's a place on the plan on line 21 where it says rainfall. It's best if you use your farm data and not average data. So keep track of that every day, right on the grazing plan. So what Rick does is he just writes in a number sideways, how many mils of rain he got that day, right on line 21. And that can be added up at the end of the year to divide into your total kgs grown, to give you that number if you are regenerative or not. So here's just some photos of some, residuals that I think are pretty good. This is at Mark Anderson's. And notice this is one of his diverse pastures. And notice it's not even because there's different plants in here. So it shouldn't look even and tidy. There should be different heights, but ideally we want a bite to be taken out of all of them. So the tall plants will have a bite and they'll be higher up, and the short plants will have a bite taken off and be lower down. So on the left here, you'll see one bite or maybe a little more taken off of all the plants. And on the right, these cows have probably taken 2 or 3 bites to get this pasture too low. And this is pretty common in perennial ryegrass systems, and it does work to create good quality in perennial ryegrass and also other weedy plants like brown top and dog's tail. But one thing it doesn't do is it doesn't allow the diversity to come in. And in fact, it reduces your perennial ryegrass over time. And that's why every 8 or 10 years we have to regrass our paddocks, because even perennial ryegrass doesn't like this system. But notice that these cows have eaten close to the dung. Once you ask them to eat close to the dung, that's their last resort. So they've gone and eaten the best, highest energy plants down to the ground before they'll eat close to their dung. Get another photo of that. So this is the part of the daily monitoring. We're going to keep track right on our grazing plan, our daily rainfall, but also as you're managing your farm, you need to keep an eye on your water. Is your water clean? Does it stay clean after rainfalls events? And this is something that you can, monitor on a daily basis. And on a yearly basis, you'll want to do infiltration, water infiltration tests to see if your farm can absorb more water year upon year. So this is the part of the grazing plan where, Rick was writing in his rainfall data. And it's kind of hard to see, but if you write it exactly sideways, it's a lot easier. And the other thing he keeps track of is how fast the grass is growing. On line 23, on the savory plans, is a place to write in the speed of your grass growth compared to normal, so that you know which side of the cruise control that data sheet spits out that you should be on.
Yeah.
So when the grass is growing fast, you'll want to be on a faster round. And when the grass is growing slower, you want to slow down your round to achieve that optimal recovery. And a little more about monitoring, something that you can do not only on a daily basis, but kind of yearly. So you want to look out for new species and to see if you're seeing a shift towards highly palatable and more diverse grasses. And I love Timothy because, cows love it. It's a high energy grass, but also it's got a lot of high quality in the summer, which is when you really need it. So I found this research, it was done down in Gore on a trial they were running weather goats, and they grew more, they got more gain per day on Timothy in the summer than they did, than they did with even perennial ryegrass, which was a surprise for me because my cows always came up in milk when they went on the ryegrass pastures. but apparently Timothy will outperform the ryegrass, especially in the summer. And in the springtime, it was awful close. And this shows you why they got that better gain in the summer, because Timothy actually has a higher quality at that time of year. You know, the quality is as good as ryegrass, and it's higher than all the other grasses. So one thing you can do as you're going through your daily, you know, the daily management of your farm is seeing if you're seeing more red clover, more Timothy, more of these deep-rooted plants. Also, dandelion is very favorable because it has a deep taproot, just like the red clover, and it can help drought-proof your farm. And when we're thinking about monitoring the mineral cycle, that's really easy to do. You just need to make sure that the dung from the previous grazing is being assimilated by the soil biology before your animals come back to graze it. And this was working on our farm after about 3 or 4 years of the regenerative grazing. So you will get to the point where you won't see any dung. It'll be hard to find a dung pat when you're bringing your animals in to graze your pastures. And that's an indicator that the soil biology is functioning and turning over minerals and doing everything you want. Another sign is a lack of thatch. You shouldn't have thatch sitting at the bottom of your pastures, because the soil biology should gobble it all up, and you should only see worm dung, like here at the Pringle farm. And again, this takes a couple of years to achieve. It did on my farm. But even on our taller pastures, they were green all the way to the bottom. And I think this is really important. You know, when holistic management was developed in seasonally dry areas like South Africa, and the people practicing it in dry areas of the US, for instance, they kind of like to have brown litter trampled to the ground, and the Australians as well. But in our wet climate, you know, we had 700 to 1,000 mils of rain. In wet climates like ours, the biology should take care of that quickly. We don't need brown litter to cover bare soil, because we should have living plants covering our soil instead. And that should make sense to farmers here in New Zealand, because, you know, brown doesn't make you any money. And also brown grasses are not pumping liquid carbon into the soil. So we want green, and we want the biology happening under there. And you can see this little worm farm happening. You know, ideally we want a worm farm across the whole farm. So that's all about the daily monitoring. So there's monthly monitoring that we should be doing. And I'm not a holistic management educator, but John King can help you with your financial monitoring, which you should do monthly. And I'm just not keen on teaching boring stuff like numbers, so I don't. But you know, hopefully some of you will eventually take John King's holistic management course and learn all about the financial monitoring, which is huge, because you know, my goal for the second half of my life is to keep farmers like you on the farm, because I think you're going to be the, you know, the climate heroes by sequestering carbon in the soil. And I love this photo of John. We were going out to Dingleburn Station, and yeah, this is just John's reaction to this road. It was pretty cool. Unfortunately, I heard that they lost some cows, kind of fell over the edge. They got spooked by some mountain bikers last month. But anyway, all around good guy. So long term, we want to see diversity increasing in our pastures, because it's going to make us weatherproof. And Rick and I went up to a field day at the garden farm up in central Otago near Miller's Flat, and they had flown on lotus seed, and they were able to double their stocking rate by, you know, having this lotus. And so I was thinking, well, how could just sprinkling on some lotus seed double your stocking rate? So I asked them, did you change your grazing management to double that stocking rate? and they're like, oh yeah, we had to change our grazing management and have longer recoveries or the lotus went away. So I think a lot of resilience can be built in just around your grazing management and have better recovery periods. But again, you want optimal, not too long a recovery, and it's going to drought proof your farm. So again, you know, the dandelion on the left, people think it's a weed, but that deep taproot is going to keep it green in the summer, and it'll also bring up water for your other plants. So on our farm in New York, we still had the perennial ryegrass and the white clover down in the bottom, as you can see in this photo. It's still down there. I reckon we had about 20-25% perennial ryegrass, but we just had layers and layers on top of that. And because there was so much shading and a lot of deep-rooted plants, they seemed to share the water and the moisture with the perennial ryegrass, so it didn't turn brown in the summer. So this is a photo taken at the White Farm, you know, north of Napier, and just a massive amount of diversity. You see clover in the bottom, there's ryegrasses down there, many, many more species on top, just adding layer upon layer. And this is kind of where I see all the farms in New Zealand going, where you have what is a much higher functioning grassland that's going to produce more grass. Of course, the trick is keeping the quality and turning that into meat and milk. And so this is just a little bit on the study by Christine, a study that supports Christine Jones' idea that the liquid carbon pathway is really important for sequestering that long-term carbon. And other studies have shown, studies in the US done on switchgrass found out that they sequestered more carbon in lower layers of the soil, and it seemed to stay there because the deeper you put the carbon, the less likely it'll oxidize or microbes will break it down. So this is going to make you guys the climate heroes. So I think it is important that you start monitoring your soil carbon, get a baseline, because you should be paid on it. And I think that's going to be happening soon. And the other thing to monitor that most people haven't thought of yet here, but you will as your farm starts teaching you more, is when you have diverse pasture, at each time of the year, different plants will dominate and take their turn in succession right in the year itself. So not only succession of different plants increasing over time, but also having a built-in succession for your season. So on this farm, we had perennial ryegrass early in the spring. This is still early spring. Step 2 is the dandelion. You know, dandelion takes over at that time before my cocksfoot and other grasses are up and running yet, and provides feed for the cows really early in the spring. So here's the, you know, same pasture early in the spring where the dandelion is, you know, kind of dominant. And then on the right, once summer comes, that's when plants like Timothy, brome grass, red clover, and bird's foot trefoil start showing themselves. So everything takes its turn. And I think that's an important thing. You know, it's how the grasslands functions in the past before we had monocultures. We don't understand that, you know, this red clover is dominant in the summer because it can handle the heat. And the other thing is, you know, the dandelions in a healthy grassland, their leaves are huge. They're like big, huge chicory leaves. They're not tiny little dandelion plants hugging the ground. And they become a good forage. So again, we talked about the keeping track of your kgs per hectare, not animal days per hectare, but you can do it in kgs per hectare right on your plan for each grazing. And then another part of the monitoring is, are you reducing your tag year upon year? So this is one paddock on Rick's Ridge Park Farm. And so the photo on the left, it was dry. I don't want you to look at how dry it was. I just want you to look at the percentage of tag, the percentage of ineffective area. So back then, you know, animals were sprinkled about, not a high density, probably a good, you know, at least 50% ineffective. But once he added the density on the right, he was able to, without topping, have much less percentage of tag. And there was more rain this April, so we're not looking at how green it is. We're just looking at the difference in the ineffective and the tag. So I do think, Simon, that the set stocking, you're going to find, and I know from our farm where we set stock, we have about 40% ineffective mosaic, where on the places we applied the density, it was probably 85% effective. So these are the different things you can achieve with the mobbing. And here's just a little bit about deferred grass and percentage of tag. So this is at Michael Harricks's farm. And on the left, he had shut up a paddock for deferred, but I like to see the deferred paddocks be grazed as soon as possible, you know, within 60 days. But this one got left kind of too long. He didn't know what to do. Well, so we suggested that he just strip graze it anyway, which he went ahead and did. And the bottom right shows the same paddock in June, where he's reduced the percentage of tag. But look at that pasture compared to the one that had been in the round, the regular round, the whole time. Because, you know, the deferred pasture was easier to trample, he was able to reduce a lot of the tag that he sees on the rest of the farm, which is kind of cool. And so this is just taken last month up there. And now we're getting into the yearly monitoring, and you want to look at your ecology, and the VSA is a really good tool for that. Most of you know how to do it, or you can learn. And also keeping track of your carbon year on year. And one thing I wanted to show you is this, the rolling 12-month rainfall at Ridge Park Farm. And this is one of the reasons it's going to be more and more important to build your carbon sponge, because in our situation, our rainfall is going down. This is 8 years of data, and look what's happening to the rain. So we're not in a summer safe area anymore. And so we're going to have to kind of change how we're managing. In the past, if you're summer safe, you can get away with set stocking quite a bit easier. But if you're going to get more of a continental type of climate where things will dry out hard in the summer, you're just not going to have enough feed to bring you through winter. Oh, yeah. So this photo, it's kind of blurry, but can you see in column 8 where Rick added up all his animal days per hectare? He likes to use the animal days, but again, you could easily convert that to kgs of dry matter by multiplying by 1.4, which is an estimate of what one livestock unit would need to eat in kgs of dry matter. So again, really important. Just want to show you this from Quentin Hazlitt's. The idea of doing the flash graze in the spring is so important because, you know, in the past, we would keep animals for a longer time on the left and make them gobble all that up. But in this case, he's using non-selective trampling, and it allows him to shift quicker. So these animals are going into what's still high quality grass in around November. And so that flash graze is really important. So this is where I wanted to give Dylan an opportunity to share his bale grazing slides. And then I think I'll escape from that. So go up a little. Do you see where it says on the left from the beginning? No, go up one to the scroll bar. That's it.
Yeah. Sorry. Okay. Can you see that?
Beautiful.
Yep.
We see your first slide.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So this is up on. We've got a dairy farm sits up a little valley at Wendon side in northern Southland, and but we've also got a runoff down the road, about 10 minutes down the road, and it's kind of, so the dairy farm's flat, and it's like a little microclimate, and the runoffs down the road, not such the microclimate, but still grows fairly well. But it's hilly, it's got some gullies and sidelings, you'll see that in a minute. So this is up on the hill, we've placed out some bales. I'll just go through the slides. I guess it's the same photo. And these are the cows starting their first break, I think, on the bale grazing up on the hill. So it's fairly, you can see the bales, it's hard to see them actually, they've been masticated a little bit. There's some in the background you can see. There's quite a few photos, so I'll just punch through them. This is, I guess, again, finishing their bales. That you can see they've still got a bit of grass there. So just commenting, I guess, what you're saying, Simon, your grass getting a bit rank and stuff, but because it was so dry, and I shut up our paddocks too early, I think. And
when did you shut them up?
I think it was in February. From memory, might have been in mid-February actually. It was fairly dry, and they all gone to seed. You'll see some photos soon of what it looks like. So that's kind of in the same paddock. Cows just got onto the bale grazing, and you'll see red clover starting to come through, but there's quite a bit of tag there, I guess, in amongst it. It's quite hard to see in that photo. Here's some cows here, kind of ready for a shift. You can see what they're going on to. And this paddock I'm in, there's another mob in behind me, but that's kind of what they're leaving. It's the same mob, just further out, what they're leaving behind in the distance. And then, yeah, this is, you can see to the left is where they've come off. We had a bit of rain just that day before, so it was a little bit muddy in the corner where the trough was. But we're pretty happy actually. We think that because the grass is so long, that the root depth was long, and it was actually giving some quite good infiltration because of the length of the grass, and also the the length of the grass was creating obviously that armoring effect on the soil as well, which is protecting the soil, well, which is not creating mud. Obviously, you can see that on the right there, little corner, there's was where the trough was. So there are issues with troughs. Where the troughs are, they seem to always create a little bit of mud.
Yeah.
This is looking, yep, these are all sort of post grazing. You can see the bales there flattened. So the ones back here, these bales here are actually 5x4 bales, slightly smaller bales, and they had seed in them, just normal grass that was harvested with normal grass. These bales here are actually we purchased them off a neighbour who done some seed for took the seed off for grass seed, and we bought straw off him. But you'll see in some slides soon that he didn't get all the seed. But these are bigger bales, 5x5 bales, and so they left a bit more litter than the other ones. So there's a cow there on bale grazing up on the hill, and there's a multi-species crops on the flat. So still, with multi-species crops, they still create mud, even though they're multi-species. It doesn't necessarily reduce the mud in the bed soil.
Yeah.
This is, I think this is a video. Yeah. Do you mind watching a small video to see what's in
Love to.
In the wet?
Nice. Still pretty good.
Yeah.
Really good. Yeah.
Is that a wet spot, or is the whole paddock like that, or is that near the top?
That's kind of a wet spot. There was there was worse parts, but there was better parts too.
Yep.
It was pretty general.
Yeah, it still looks good though. It's all right.
Yeah, I was pretty happy with it. Well, going back to that on top, we'd cropped previous years and with chow and fodder beet, and it was soup. It was just, you couldn't even, on days I couldn't actually drive a tractor through it. It was that thick and mud, and was unbelievable. So this is a huge contrast to what we've used to. I didn't actually think we could bale graze on these top paddocks because of what I'd experienced earlier, but it's proved me wrong. So this is the first paddock we bale grazed. That's probably a few weeks after we'd finished that. You can see the hay in the paddock there, and this paddock is on the flat. So this is tailings. This is like where they used to dredge for the gold up in the Waikawa area, and so it's really free draining, and that's so what we just try to do is take the cows down on the flat when the bad weather was coming, because it's free draining. You can see them all laid out there, and this is kind of, I guess, typical of what would happen. Obviously the cows would go down when it's raining on the flat, so they create a little bit of mud, but I was still pretty happy with, and that was probably one of the worst patches of mud down there, and it's all in the same area. But actually, if you look hard, you can see that grass is still there, and I haven't taken recent photos, but this is all growing really well now. Like, it's probably about 3 or 4 inches high, and that was only 2 months, 2 months ago I took this picture. This photo here I just took about 2 weeks ago, up on this, go back to the paddock, this paddock here, right down the far corner. This is what's coming through now. This is red clover, rye.
Was that in the seed? Like,
I think, yeah. Well, I believe
well, that looks like it's a plant.
Yes, that's what I'm thinking too.
Yeah.
But you can see there are some seeds germinating in amongst it. But when you go to a bale, so this is one of those bales that the 5x5 ones that he'd taken the seed off. But these are all germinated seeds from that bale.
Yeah.
So these are all germinated in the winter in July, and this is what's coming through. It's pretty impressive.
It's quite a pasture still, isn't it?
Yeah, it's breaking down really well.
Yeah.
This is back on a dairy farm. So this paddock here, we bale grazed last year as well. We carved our cows in it. If you look to the left between the bales, you can see those patches of sort of shiny grass.
Yeah.
That's where the bales were last year.
Yeah.
So we're hoping in another 2 more winters we'll have that whole paddock covered with that kind of lush feed coming through. So this is the cows just going onto those on the dairy farm now, bale grazing. It's kind of the result that they're leaving behind. These are heifers calving, so they're on bale grazing too. It's that was a wettish sort of couple of days, but not too bad, really. There's heifers done that, so I was pretty happy that they were actually doing the same job as cows. This is a calving mob on a frosty morning. This is what they do.
Yeah.
And this is a video I'll show you. You'll see even better what they do. Just a 10-second one.
It reminds me of New York.
Does it?
Yeah.
Happy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's quite cool actually when you go out like that. So and this is what they do when they calve. They calve on the bale.
They're not stupid.
Yeah. So our calf mortality rate has reduced because of the calving on bale grazing.
Nice.
Jack actually, I did. Yeah, Jack's got a photo of. We actually can't find the calves sometimes because they're snuggled in the bale.
Aw.
And because you can't actually, they're hiding. You can't find them.
You did send me a photo of one with just her head sticking out.
Oh,
That must be it.
that must be, yeah. Jack's got it on his phone. And this is so we're doing some work with ag research. It's our first year of a 3-year trial. I've got a couple of videos here I'll put on. You can see the difference there. This is the first ones of just them going within a couple of hours of them being on the first trial. The trial went for 2 days, so just so.
Chewing her cud.
Yeah.
And what's the forage crop?
Chow.
Oh, just a monoculture.
Just a monoculture. Getting just a typical Southland winter crop. If you, I'll just go back to something. I'll pause it. See that grass right in front of the cows there?
Yep.
That's where a bale was sitting last year. So that's the bale grazing patch.
That's what grew.
Yeah.
And with the bale grazing, were you shifting every 3 days?
Yes. So yes, we were. So it's half a hectare every 3 days with about 14, 15 bales thereabouts. Every day. So this is another quick video of after the trial. They're just about to come off the trial, off the plots now.
Is that the crop one?
Yeah, yeah. You can't even see that some of it's just buried.
Yeah.
Oh, they ate it. Yep.
So we got about 30 odd miles, well, just before and during the first part of during the trial. So that represents, some weather conditions.
Yeah.
And the next plot there is we're actually doing the milking platform as well. So we'll graze that during the season. So that's the end.
Very good. Thanks for sharing that.
Okay.
What's the aim of that trial? To see
What's that?
what is the aim of that trial?
So ag research, one of the big focuses is on nitrate leaching. To see
Okay.
what leaches through, but also they're looking at all sorts of stuff, pugging, grass growth, what happens in those patches where the bale is regarding nitrate leaching as well compared to the grass where the live roots are. And next year there's some animal welfare type scientists come down from up Ruakura, coming putting apparatuses on the cows to measure the lying out, sitting and lying and taking temperatures and blood tests and things like that as well.
Oh, right. Cool.
So, I don't have to do anything here, do I? Do I have to hand things over to you again?
No, I think I do have a couple of questions first, and then if we all might want to grab a bite to eat and take a break for a half hour, and I can reschedule a meeting for whatever time you guys would like to come back, 12:30 or something. What do you reckon?
Yep, I'm happy with that. Along with the next.
Is that okay, Simon?
Yep, 12:30 is fine.
Okay, and I did have a question on that. So do you think you could have got another cutting of hay or another grazing before you shut up those paddocks in February for the bale grazing?
Yes, that's my thinking.
That's what I think.
Because, just take probably just a shortcut, and shut it up slightly later, and we might have got a slightly better quality feed for them. Because I think it had an effect on their weight gain during the winter. So we did some. I even showed. I should have actually had them on the slides actually. body condition scoring. We condition scored the cows on bale grazing and on crop at the start of June, and then we did it at the start of August, and the crop cows actually put on slightly more weight. So
there was more energy. Yep.
Yeah, but I believe we can mitigate that with bale grazing because it's just our first year really doing it, and those quality of grass and maybe, you know, looking at better quality of hay as well.
Yeah.
I think would have helped.
Yeah. I don't know if you remember when you were here, but remember when we went over to the Nishes farm
Yes.
where they were bale grazing? I thought he could have got another grazing off of that before he shut it up, because it actually started to kind of turn yellow.
Yeah.
Whereas if he had got another grazing in there, it would have helped with his drought situation. And also he probably would have been able to get the same height back, but it would have been green.
Yeah, okay. We're still happy with our body. We're still averaged over five body condition score, which is what you're aiming for coming.
Your cows look like they're in great condition.
Yeah, so still happy with that. We had a bit of a tail end, but again, managing those two, we could probably, you know, cut them out and feed them better. Just those couple of tail end ones.
Yeah. Oh, well done. Any more questions for Dylan?
Nice.
Sweet. So okay, I'd like to oh, go ahead, Simon. You got a question? No.
How's it compare time wise? Can you switch? Will you be able to switch all your herd to bale grazing in the future, or is cropping still gonna play a part?
We're hoping this year to be 100% bale grazing for the herd, and
wow.
we're still probably for this year maybe going to put our young stock on some multi-species crops. But that with the aim of getting them on bale grazing after that. It's probably more our logistics of just knowing how we're going to get all that bale grazing on our runoff, etc. That's more the question for us, is how we're going to do that. But yeah, so we're moving it, like shifting them every 3 days is such a breeze. These guys love it. It's just taking a bit of kneading off the hay. Cows just so placid, they're happy. When they're up on top of that hill that you saw, and the snow came, we had a mob up there, and they were still really happy, because what I've learnt is that when they've got all that hay, they ruminate a lot, because like rough feed, and that rumination creates heat, which keeps the cow warm. Where if you went down to the crop cows on the same day, and even though they're off the top of a hill, they were slabby, hungry, walking up and down the, you know, creating mud.
Yeah. Well, also they didn't have a dry place to lie down.
That's right.
Yeah.
Do you think you could have moved your tubs? You know, if they're portable tubs and they've got a length of hose, couldn't you have like shifted them every day to reduce plugging in one place?
Yeah, we started doing that, just trying that to see, and it did improve, but it's in where the conditions, it didn't, still created mud.
Just make more really, because you'd have 3 different mud spots in that one area instead of just that one mud spot.
So I think
so maybe it's worse.
Yeah, maybe we just, well, in those wet conditions anyway, we just go around and just, you know, patch them up during the, you know, soon when it dries out.
Yeah. Well done.
Yeah, nice. And what about is there any way you could put a big rubber mat or something on the ground where the trough is? Soften a few hoof blows, or it wouldn't make any difference.
That's an idea.
Yeah, we could think about that actually.
You'd have to put them and drag it around with a 4-wheeler though, because it'd be heavy.
I know.
And
We've
it might
got
not make any difference. But
it's a good idea.
We've got road crossing mats that get old and tear up. We might be able to make something of that actually, that we drag with a motorbike. So yeah, that's a possibility.
Something like that.
Cool.
Yeah. Thanks. That's giving us an idea.
That's what this is all about.
Yeah.
I had deferred grazing similar to you, or what you already know. But I grazed it with sheep. Next year I grazed it with cattle, but I shut it up too early.
Yeah.
And And Siobhan, you said before, what, you know, like 60 days might be the optimal time to have it shut up
Well, at the most.
at the most. Yeah, so 40 or 50 days, especially with me, for sheep might be better.
Yeah. Well, it'll be better for anyone, because if it's deferred, you know, so for instance, if someone's on an 18-day round, which is kind of what I recommend in the springtime in November, if you just skip a paddock for one round, they'll be coming back in 36 days. And if you still have a true surplus, you could drop something else out.
And eat that one.
Because remember, only a green leaf can harvest solar energy for you. We want to manage for green.
Yeah, okay.
That's what I'll do, what you just said. Yeah, graze that one and knock another one out next time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And Dylan, is it going to be easy for you to say you got your whole block there? How are you going to approach it to shut it up? I guess you run as the cattle graze around it, you'll just leave it shut up behind them. So as they go through the winter, it'll stagger out for your bale grazing.
Yeah, you can't just go all at once, but yeah, that's kind of graze those areas and let, I guess, where we won't be bale grazing, let it grow a bit longer perhaps, and then we'll be able to slow them down once they get into that, to keep them off it until the winter turns up. That's kind of a plan we have to negotiate yet, you know, work through.
Yeah.
And that's why I think we still need a bit of crop at the moment until we sort of understand how we can do that better.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it's also wise to do a transition that's gradual and slow, because you're learning at the same time. I think it would be foolish to drop all your crop all at once and go cold turkey. Yeah.
We harvest a lot of those paddocks too, so we're actually not grazing a lot of them. We harvest them anyway, and they only get grazed in the winter, which is with bale grazing. Yeah. Because we need so many bales. Yeah. Now your tractor might be working when you go to mow that this summer. You might have so much grass. What a bugger! I'll just get the blade sharp. Now you'll have to drop down a gear. Just on the question on that deferred grazing, Siobhan, like say if it was on like 50 days or something that you go in, how would you eat that, like 50% or less still, same as it? So actually with the deferred grass, you only want to take a third. And you want to trample 90% of it. So you want to do it by strip grazing it. And if you're not using R2s or young stock, and if you're using the milk cows, you'll want to just have it as a day paddock where you strip graze it and then have them on a better quality paddock at night, and then come back to that in the daytime so that you don't lose milk production. But whereas with the normal paddocks, we want to take half and leave half, and they'll take the top. When you come onto a deferred paddock, they actually don't eat the top at all. They lick out the best out of the bottom. So there's two things that are different. Instead of taking the top, they take the bottom, and you just want them to lick out the 1/3 of the best and trample the rest. Okay. So, but because you are starting with more biomass, they'll pretty much be eating the same area, but only taking a third and getting the same amount of kgs of dry matter. Yeah. Does that make sense? Yeah. So on the grazing plan, you'd keep it in the round speed that the plan has it on. You won't be in there longer because there's more feed, because you only want them to get the top quality out of that, because of course your quality has been compromised. So you just want the top end of the quality to be eaten, trample it. But the genius about the the deferred pastures, is they come back into your round quicker at top quality. So then if you had cut it for hay, it might be 40 days before you could graze it again. But if you defer graze it, they can be back in maybe 25, 30 days. So it brings them back into your round quicker. Okay. Cool. That's a whole new concept of deferred grazing. I didn't know. Right. So you might have a little green thing where you can unshare your screen, and then how about we all take a little lunch break and come back at
12:30.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Yes.
And
thanks.
I'll send you all